morning started with a tragedy in Uttarakhand with a glacier burst flooding the Chamoli district and villages there. 24 people have been killed, 200 are still missing, and rescue operations have frantically been on for the last couple of days. In fact, hydrothermal projects over there have been affected. There's a hydro project at Tapovan tunnel which has been affected as well, among others, and the Rishi Ganga project too has been impacted. Now, even as rescue and relief work is on, questions are being asked by environmentalists as to why this has happened. To make it very clear, there is no way to get an answer to this question just overnight, a day after a tragedy like this occurs. And our first thought must be towards relief and rescue, must be towards those who have passed away and saving as many lives as we can. But we also have to remember what happened in this very area in 2013 in Kedarnath, which was a cloud burst which led to massive flooding in this area. Over 5,000 people had died then. Have we learned lessons about 8 years later from what happened in Kedarnath? Are there developmental projects there which have disturbed the very sensitive ecology of the area? Are we seeing the work of climate change in play? Because remember that this is still supposed to be a very cold period. So why was there a glacier burst? While we don't have definitive answers, it's important to listen to the experts and what they have to say about some of these questions. So I'm joined now by Suruchi Bhadwal, Senior Fellow at TERI, and Samrat Sengupta, Program Director of Climate Change at CSE. Welcome to both of you and thank you for speaking with us today. Mr. Sengupta, let me begin with your take on what we have seen happening in Uttarakhand in the last 48 hours.
What we have seen, the visuals, it seems like a bluff, but there is no data to support that because there is no lake formation or data supporting a lake formation in the upper region of Nanda Devi biosphere. But what DRDO is talking now about a glacier's mass being breakdown, kind of a avalanche, and then it has been formulated some kind of a natural lake through debris, which later broke. Which later means it caused this havoc flood or flash floods kind of thing. Now, what is the reason of that? We cannot attribute to a single reason because even after all the data will come up and everything, we know the exact what has happened, but what is the reason for that? It is mix of a human interference, the huge developmental work in terms of power plant, road, tunnels, which is happening on that fragile strata. Himalayan geology is too fragile, being young and one of the youngest mountain in that region where seismic activity is quite regularly happening, and this kind of unjust and very dense development in terms of infrastructure development may trigger more frequent and of that kind of seismic activity, which also has a footprint of this kind of natural calamity. And also the climate change, definitely climate change is, it cannot be deniable. It has been studied for last many decades, the impact on temperature rise and the glaciers melt and all this, because this is not the February is not the period when that kind of thing is expected. It's generally post monsoon. People do expect that kind of.
So when you say GLOF, when Mr. Samrat Sengupta is saying GLOF, he's talking about a glacial lake outburst flood, which some are suspecting could have caused this. Suruchi Bhadwal, for our viewers, can you explain very simply what could be the possible causes, and the reason for asking this question today, even as rescue and relief is going on, is to understand the wider implications. This is an area where we have a massive highway project coming in. There are several hydro projects coming in. India is one of the countries that is betting big on hydro projects, even as the world looks at solar and other sources. So in that context, it's important to understand what could have happened here. Could you put that forward for us, please?
Yeah, so many things here. I'd start with the incident itself that occurred yesterday. Frankly speaking, I do think there's a larger role of the climate to play over here in terms of the nature of the event that took place. It is not something that unravels in a day's time that you see a flood happening the next day. So it has been accumulating consistently over years. So tens and decades, 2 or 3 decades over, as the temperatures have consistently been rising, the glaciers have weakened over that period of time. And then, of course, there's a time when the glacier becomes so unstable that it gives apart, it breaks away. Or maybe it takes the form of a lake, which then basically bursts out and takes the shape of a flood. So it hasn't happened overnight, frankly speaking. It has happened over years. It has happened over decades. It's a cumulative effect over a larger period of time of more than 2 to 3 decades that we see it happening in the winter season now and happening in the month of February, which people are questioning. I think this is something very concerning because in the winter period, if the glacier has become so unstable that it breaks apart, God forbid, what is the condition of our other glaciers that are there in the Himalayan region? I think we have to be pretty concerned about all our glaciers in the 12 Himalayan states that we have within the country. So now, if you look at where these glaciers are located, these are very remote areas, remotest of the remote areas, the height, altitude at which you find these glaciers. You do not have human interference, at least in those areas, to impact the glacier itself. So now there's something else which is under play, which is affecting the glaciers. And frankly speaking, it's the temperatures that have risen over the years and decades, which are quite warm compared to 50 years, 100 years from now and pre-industrial era, which is having an influence on these natural systems that exist in these high altitudinal places where ideally you don't have people moving in, and there's no tourism also, frankly speaking. There are people who go there for research, etc. But these are untouched places. I've been to some of the glaciers myself. You don't just find people walking around over there. So these are
to understand this. So Suruchi, to understand this, and to break it down for our viewers, you're saying that the fact that this could have been the glaciers melting and a glacier burst happening in the month of Feb when they're typically very cold temperatures is of huge concern. We've also been reading and hearing that the Himalayas are warming up at a very rapid pace. So where does all the developmental work fit in? Are the hydro projects and the huge road infrastructures not causing any interference? Can they go on safely if this is the situation which is unfolding?
So it's just not the temperatures. I would just like to add to my previous point. It's also about the precipitation, the nature of rainfall that we are now receiving in these, high altitudinal zones. It's not in the form of snow, and maybe it's more in the form of rain that we are receiving, and therefore snow accumulation also has gotten affected in these regions. Therefore, glacial mass has gotten affected in terms of making the glacier stable. So it's a cumulative effect of many factors. Now comes in the development angle. Now your development is happening somewhere, downstream, a few kilometers down, couple of kilometers down where these glaciers basically occur. So the occurrence of the event itself is attributable to to anthropogenic reasons linked to climate change, which is disturbing the glaciers. But once the event has occurred, then of course it will create havoc to all kinds of development that is surrounding the place. As the flood moves forward into human habitations and other developmental areas. So whether you're building dams or whether you're building, other kinds of infrastructure on the path of the disaster, it is likely to get affected, and therefore they are risk prone to such events in such locations which are highly fragile. I hope I've answered your question.
Does all of this development Samrat Sengupta, of course, these projects will be impacted, but do these projects and the rampant development there also have an impact in term?
First thing I want to address that when last almost more than 4 decades, we are deliberating on the impact on climate change and impact on this global warming on Himalayan glaciers and making it more fragile and related mass balance in the glaciers, how it is near to the tipping point and everything. So the in terms of the infrastructure development, what is happening, particularly based on the freshwater flow out of these glaciers through this perennial river system. In the planning of that, are we taking these climate attributes into consideration? I think there is a lacuna. Because if we are in a so fragile system, when the glaciers is breaking in the month of February, so there is a severe question on the mass balance on the glaciers. Has it crossed the tipping point? If it crossed the tipping point, what is the point of investing in a huge capital intensive hydro project in that region, which if doesn't run for at least 50 years on its full capacity will not give a return on its investment. Also, from the point of view of impact on the geological strata, definitely if the dam construction as well as various road construction, the way it has been constructed, though in our EIA, EMP, there are several technological interventions and things has been stated and accepted during approval, but at the regulation or at the monitoring and verification on during construction, it has always been seen being breached. So that we need to be more concerned about what we commit on paper should be maintained and actual operation.
Yeah. A lot of questions right now which are coming to the fore after this huge tragedy has taken place. Now, climate change is, one of those things that we know is a man-made factor, but no one can point any fingers at anyone. So we all sort of look away and blame climate change up there without fixing any responsibility. We need to start doing that because this is truly impacting lives and we're seeing the effects of this in Uttarakhand right now. We have to ask ourselves whether we have learned any lessons since 2013. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us on the show.